Today's topic is all about writing with a co-author or collaborator of some sort. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 tips to help you do it better. Three years ago, when I started this YouTube channel to try to help writers with their writing, one of the early topics that I covered was writing with a collaborator. And I think it's time to revisit this topic. Many things have changed in terms of how we communicate with one another through the pandemic and after the pandemic, and I think now it's time to look at it again. There are a few reasons why you might consider writing with a co-author, and there are probably quite a few reasons why you would want to walk away from it and not choose to write with a co-author. If somebody were to describe me, they would probably say something like, does not play well with others. And in fact, over the years, through my almost 3 decades as a university professor, only 2 occasions that I could recall where I ever agreed to co-author a paper with somebody. Everything else I wrote on my own, and as you probably know, when it comes to academia, academics tend to co-author a lot of papers and books. The books I wrote and the papers that I wrote them myself. Now that being said, years ago, when I started my writing career as a health and medical writer, I was in the unique position of being married to someone who was what you might call a content expert in a specific area. I happened to be married to a doctor whose area of expertise at the time, along with whatever else he did, was medical ethics. We wrote 4 books together. He was primarily the subject expert, but I did also have a background in health science, so that was helpful for us as we worked together in understanding all of the concepts. He put together the content, and I primarily did the writing. So we created a way to have a team to work on a book together. And we did that 4 times quite successfully. So I learned a lot through that process, and I've learned a lot more since from other people who have also written with others. Now, before we begin, I want to differentiate between a co-author and a ghostwriter. You may have thought that these 2 things are similar. They are not actually similar at all. Here's the definition of a co-author. A co-author is someone who collaborates on writing of a literary work. Now let's compare that with the definition of a ghostwriter. A ghostwriter is someone who writes for someone else who is named as solely as the author. One way to differentiate is co-authors are acknowledged on the cover of a book. Both names would be on the book, 2 or 3 if they are all co-authors. Ghostwriters are not acknowledged on the book or anywhere else by name, and probably not mentioned at all in good company. They remain ghosts in the shadows. That's what they're for. Today I'm talking about co-authoring something. How to work with someone else to write a literary piece, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. The main reason that you might choose to work with a co-author is because you each have something to offer the project. If the person working with you does not have something to offer the project that you don't already have, then there's not much point in having a co-author. So really what you're looking for is complementary skills and knowledge. One of the things you need to be aware of, though, is that you might think that by writing with a partner that you will cut the work in half. It doesn't actually work that way. You might cut it by 1/3, but you're not going to cut it in half. Now let's go to the tips that I have for today. Tip number 1, choose a co-author whose knowledge and skills complements but does not duplicate yours, and whose passion equals yours. All of this is going to add considerably to the project and going to cut down on redundancies and cut down on arguments as well. If you both have the same knowledge and expertise, you're more likely to argue. Tip number 2, establish clear communication channels at the outset. Now this is one of the things that has changed actually over the years in terms of how one works with a co-author. Used to be that co-authors would sit in the same room. That's certainly how I worked as a co-author, but nowadays there are many other virtual ways to connect with someone else and to work collaboratively on a project. But one of the things that's really important is to agree up front on how you're going to do that. Are you going to use email? Are you going to use shared documents? Are you going to use regular collaborations like Zoom meetings, for example? These are the things that you have to agree on. If you're working with somebody who only wants to work in person and you prefer to work virtually, then you're going to have a problem. So you have to agree on that at the beginning. Tip number 3, set the ground rules for your writing process, defining the roles and responsibilities of each person. You have to start by clarifying each one of your roles on the project. For example, who is going to write the first draft? How are you going to do that? Who's going to do the editing? Who's going to do the final copy editing, the final drafting? Who's going to work with an editor if you're going to work with an editor later? You have to clarify those up front, who is going to do what, and then you can develop a process. Tip number 4, set deadlines and milestones. You're going to have to agree on when to have the first draft finished, when to have the second draft finished, when to have the final revisions done. When you divide your work into these chunks, it makes it much more manageable to work on when you're doing it by yourself, but also when you're doing it with a partner. You may not always set deadlines for yourself when you're working alone, but it's very important to set deadlines when you're working with someone else, or it can be absolutely frustrating. Tip number 5, respect each other's ideas and feedback. You're going to have to be open to constructive criticism and feedback from your co-author. Obviously, you should be open to constructive criticism from anyone whose opinion you actually value and who knows what they're talking about, but it's really important when you do it with a co-author. You're going to have to work together to find solutions to problems. And I have a bonus tip for you. Try to maintain a sense of humor throughout the process. You know, working with someone else can ease the burden in some ways. It can also increase it in other ways. So you have to be careful. So mutual respect between the co-authors is very important, but be able to laugh things off. When I think about writing with a partner, I sometimes think about something Stephen Covey once wrote. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. One of the things you do have to remember is that when you work with a co-author, you give up that complete control. You share the control of a project with someone else. Make sure you're ready for that, and good luck finding a good co-author. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat, and maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.